Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where you meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothberg. Welcome to the 51st episode of the Shipping Podcast. Today we are going to talk about cross-cultural communication and how important that is in an international business, but also on board a ship. I'm going to introduce you to Laxmi Chaudhry. She has over 30 years international experience in strategic and operational human resources and many years as a cross-cultural specialist and trainer. The first time I met Laxmi was at the Vista International AGM and conference held in Stockholm in 2011. We were focusing on leadership, and Laxmi was one of the keynote speakers. Laxmi works in all kinds of industries with cross-cultural training, not only in shipping. So neither of us uses the language from the sea. But I'm convinced that you will understand all that we're talking about anyhow and realize how important it is to understand people and to want to understand other people. Many of the businesses in the shipping industry is global. So what Laxmi is talking about is tools to use in your everyday work. This episode is sponsored by the Swedish Club, which is a leading marine insurer. To be a member of the Swedish Club community is sharing operational experience in crucial areas of safety and loss prevention. In these and other areas, the Swedish Club acts as a facilitator, coordinating initiatives that benefit all members. So you can understand why the Swedish Club thinks it's important that we all listen to some cross-cultural training and coaching from Laxmi. So, without further ado, here is the interview with Laxmi Chaudhry. Welcome to the Shipping Podcast. Could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Lena, for inviting me. My name is Laxmi Chaudhry. I work as a cross-cultural consultant trainer. And since it is about culture, I'd like to just introduce my culture too. I'm originally from north part of India. I was born in East Africa in Tanzania. And I've been living in Britain now 49 years. And out of those 49 years, I've also lived 5 years in Asia Pacific. In my life, I have worked as a human resources and training director. My last job was human resources director for Asia Pacific. I've been in this field of human resources for over 27 years. And through my work, I've been exposed to almost 38 cultures, or perhaps more. I've lost count. And for the last 12 to 13 years, I've been working in the field of cross-cultural working and how to be more effective working across cultures. Because cultures are very different, especially when it comes to communication, and therefore one needs to understand how to do that in a more appropriate way to be more effective.
So how do you work with that? I mean, do you go and visit the companies or?
Yes. How do I work? As you know, Lena, today the world is a global village. I don't think I've come across any company which is working monoculturally. Every company today, as we are a little village, global village, we are working with someone or the other. And if I look at the shipping industry, I would like to say to you that in the shipping world today, you have perhaps on a ship, especially if you're going to be away 2-3 months or more, you have maybe 4 or 5 cultures on the ship, or it could be even 12 cultures on the ship. If you look at, if you're onshore and you have employed people, you are now working with cultures which are from probably 10 or 12 or even 16 cultures. Because again, you have to draw, and because of your marketing and where you are marketing your products or where you're working with many, many more cultures. So if you have to work across cultures, communication is the big piece, because not only are you working across cultures, but they're not actually physically with you. Sometimes they are actually sitting time zone wise, very different time zones, 7 hours, 12 hours, or even more. On top of that, culturally diverse people as well. And the biggest piece is communication, which is the glue in business. So if that glue gets unstuck because we do not understand how some other cultures communicate, the bottom line doesn't come in.
So are you invited to companies to come and give a speech, or do you do workshops?
Yes.
Or
I get invited, of course, for conference speaking. Many companies hold their strategic conferences where their management and staff from different parts of the world are attending. And they want to introduce this topic of culture because it is a soft factor which nobody considers. As I was mentioning earlier to you, that there are many companies who are then deciding to set up their businesses, or they work with partners, or they work with their subsidiaries in different countries. And when they're trying to set up something or even work with new partners as a joint venture, they go with the idea of calculating everything on the hard factors, which is primarily related with finance. What they all forget is there are soft factors included, because the people they're going to be working with is actually people. It's not empty chairs or empty furniture or anything. So they need to understand the soft factors. And sometimes companies have gone with both their feet into the new culture without looking at the soft factors, and regrettably, few months later or even a year later, their bottom line is not coming in. And this is when they realize that they need to understand, because everything is to do with people. We tend to wear our own lenses in operating, and we think the way we speak or the way we communicate is the right way, the correct way. Anyone else doing it differently is wrong. But I'd like to share with you that no culture is right or wrong. It is just different. And you only understand the difference when you become aware of how that culture works and what makes them communicate the way they do, or what makes them work the way they do, which are centered around value system. And each of our cultures have a different value system, which is driving business, or on a personal level, or even on a social level. So I get invited sometimes at conference speaking, so they get a taster for it. Then they sometimes feel, oh, we would like to do this as a workshop. And I provide customized workshops for my clients. My clients are from all parts of industry, to be honest, all sectors of industry, from manufacturing to shipping to airlines, to financial services, investment banks, engineering companies, and telecoms companies. You name it, everybody's working in different cultures. And fortunately, because I've been at the sharp end of working in different cultures, I've learned, of course, by making lots of mistakes, but I've learned it hard. And now I help address those challenges companies are facing. I've had a lot of experience in it at first hand, and now I help address those. And each of my workshop, training, seminar, you may call it, is customized to the needs and the challenges of the company I'm working with. So I conduct a lot of pre-questionnaires. I work with management who have to tell me the challenges, and then I prepare the program, which is, of course, very interactive, experiential, because that's how you learn. And then it is a very effective way of learning, because not only am I sharing my experience and knowledge with the people, but the people who are participating in my course are also having a lot of experience and challenges, as well as knowledge, which is being shared right across the room.
Could you give an example of challenges, intercultural challenges?
Okay, I think some of them will be related to communication in a way. It could be related with decision making, how decisions are made in organizations and culturally in different cultures. If you're coming from an Anglo-Saxon culture, for instance, I don't even call it Western culture, because in the Western Europe, for instance, we would like to say, or even if I use Scandinavia on top of that, because I've had experience of working for an airline, which was Scandinavian Airlines, for actually 7.5 years. I would say we may have a very direct way of communicating. We say what we mean. And at times, this can be taken on, I would say, in an insulting way, or people may think we're too direct and we're too aggressive. We may even come across as confrontational. But we're doing nothing wrong. We're just doing what we normally do, which is say as it is. In other cultures, the communication style is indirect and polite, perhaps. And these cultures may not say everything in a very direct fashion. So they may give you a holistic viewpoint. They may talk in a circular manner. And for those, if you're not used to that kind of way of communicating, we interpret that from an Anglo-Saxon culture point of view, or direct communication culture point of view, I'd like to use the word, that they're weaving a yarn, or they are talking in coded language, or we think they're not telling us the truth. The word truth itself has many meanings in different cultures, and therefore we do not know what is being said to us. And this is what's happening when we're doing across the time zones our communication. Not only do we have a virtual communication challenge, but we also have a culturally diverse challenge, which if we start understanding how communication occurs in different cultures, it will become, through awareness training, of course, it becomes a bit easier. We become even more effective because we have to now adapt to a new way of working rather than do the old way, because it doesn't work in that culture. And some of the examples are at times when people have been very direct, the other side is indirect, they have taken offense, you have not probably heard any answers back despite you writing 3, 4, 5 emails, even making a phone call. Sometimes you've not had that responses. And of course, this is going to impact your bottom line or your workflow in a way.
And it also goes to leadership, I presume.
Leadership style, How do you handle or how do you manage people who are of diverse cultures? Because that leadership style or management style is very, very different. There are cultures where decisions are empowered, or you're empowered to do your job, where you're very involved, you're responsible, and you're also accountable. In some other cultures, you may be responsible for what you're doing, but accountability is not yours, because the decision-making power lies with your hierarchy, the next manager up, or even 3 ranks higher than the next manager. And then at times, you are not able to give answers to people. The other side is waiting for them. And you don't even say the answer that I'm waiting for my boss to tell, because the other party hasn't even asked you that question. They just asked you, where is the report? And you say it's on its way. And it may not be in its way because the decision on that report was to be made by the manager, who is now actually away for 3 weeks. And this can impact big time.
So if we think about the vessel and let's say mixed cultures on board, how do you address things like that?
Okay. We were talking about how did I come into the shipping industry, or how did I work with the shipping industry? And I'd like to just say it's so funny that I've gone back, in fact, because I've done most of the shipping industry in Scandinavia. Most of my clients are in that part of the world at this point. Of course, they span Europe and they span America, but most of them are there. And it was almost like coming home, because I started my career, my first job was with a manufacturing company as an HR officer, and then I became an HR manager and then a director. I worked with Scandinavian Airlines for 7.5 years. So when I started working in Sweden or in Denmark, in the Scandinavian countries, it was like coming home again, because that was kind of my first baby, my job. And the shipping industry, I fell into it in a way by Lloyd's List had published my article, which I had written. Can't remember the title at this point, but I do remember the date and the year, which was 8th of December when it got published in 2005. And then some shipping companies from Scandinavia approached me because they had read it. The leaders of those companies had read this article. And I was invited to speak at a strategic conference in Split, where 22 different cultures of that shipping company, the leaders from different countries of the world were attending that conference. And I was asked to speak for half day on culture and with challenges related with different cultures. And that started the ball rolling because the word spread and more shipping companies have invited me to work with them. And since then, I've spoken at conferences in the Scandinavian and other countries on the shipping world. But I speak at conferences which are also for Vista, for instance, but also with other countries, whether it's pharmaceutical industry conference or manufacturing conference or investment bank conference. But I also get invited by those same companies to work on workshops on business effectiveness. So how do we become effective, even more effective, I would like to use the word, when you're working across cultures.
So going back to the ship.
So you have a vessel which has got 5 cultures. Hopefully the captain has done his homework, that he knows which cultures are coming on board. And we hope, and I'm being very optimistic because I'm an optimistic person, that he or she is actually aware of those cultural differences because he's been through some cultural training. Especially on board a ship, when you are going to be locked away for 4 or 5 months or less, there are lots of things which could be compromised. So the biggest things I can think of immediately are security, safety, environment. These can be compromised big time if there is a lack of understanding on culture. So there are cultures on that ship who tend to be very hierarchical, or you have the lower levels of the staff, for instance, seafarers, who may be from cultures where hierarchy is very, very important. And as I said to you earlier, we look at everything through our own lenses. So in that part of the world, the culture expects people to give respect to the higher person or even older person. So you don't have to be higher in just a job. You could be just older in age. And you have to behave deferentially, and you do not question authority. Now imagine when a captain of another culture who may not appreciate these cultural differences, who gives instructions for a cargo to be discharged in the middle of the night on the east side of the ship, because the wind normally blows in a particular direction and it has to be discharged. Captain has gone to bed. The seafarers or the others who are discharging this cargo, the wind direction has certainly changed. And now the cargo technically should be discharged from the west side. But they were given instruction on the east side. They just obey it, although they are totally aware that the wind will create ecological disaster because this cargo will be deposited on the beaches, fish will die perhaps or whatever, and they're going to obey the instruction to the T. It's not because they can't think outside of their box. They know, but they have been given that instruction. They do not disobey the instruction. And the next day, you have huge consequences. Not only consequences for ecological disasters, but high insurance costs. And when asked, these people will probably answer that this is what the instruction was. Now, if I just continue the story, had the captain been aware that these cultures normally say yes to everything, may not question him, or they will obey the instruction to the T. But he had also said, if the wind changes, please do it the other way, then you might have saved this huge ecological disaster with high insurance costs. I hope this helps you.
I get your point. I get your point.
Thank you.
Companies, do they appreciate this, the need for intercultural education?
I think it's starting to grow a little bit more. I think the appreciation occurs when there have been costs involved or the bottom lines haven't come in. So when insurance costs go up because of lack of cultural understanding, then suddenly they want to, sometimes it's a knee-jerk reaction, sometimes it's well thought out. But I believe as all industry groups are working across cultures, it's starting to take place a bit more on a conscious level. And in the shipping world, I do quite a lot of this work now because of this reason. But of course, all the other industry groups, because they have outsourced jobs in different countries, or they have acquired new organizations in a different culture, and they have realized that things haven't worked out the way they thought it would. People are becoming conscious. But it's still, I would say, it's still fairly new. I feel it occurs much more, at least in my experience, it occurs much more when costs have been involved. Things haven't happened. The deadlines haven't been met. It has impacted their bottom line big time.
Yeah, I mean, shipping has always been a global industry.
Yes.
So we have always had various cultures meeting each other. And in the old days, maybe no one really understood the consequences of different cultures working together. And also, as seafarers comes from new nations or other countries than they usually did, then there are new cultural possible
new challenges. Yeah, new challenges. Because as you rightly say, Lena, that maybe the seafarers were from a very similar culture. You know, as we've discussed in the past, that cultures have similarities and cultures have differences. So when there are similarities, there aren't that many new challenges for us. Little bits, but we can manage it. But when the cultural differences become big, then that's where the pain starts occurring, because we only know our way of doing it. They know it only their way. Now the gaps have grown, and to address those gaps, awareness training helps, because when I'm doing any form of training, whether it's in interactive workshops or even if I'm addressing an audience, I'm not going to change the audience to become another culture. Not at all. I want them to be authentic and remain themselves. But what I'm requesting them, or I'm suggesting to them, is if you become aware of it, you can adapt to a new way of working. And by adapting to a new way of working, you can become even more effective. You get less frustrated. And talking of this, I'd like to say it is not one-sided equation at all. You know, as we all know, a coin has two sides. Both sides need to understand each other. Or we have 6 cultures. All 6 cultures need to understand each other to be able to work better. And this is what happens when I do sometimes cultural integration workshops, where, you know, there are 4 or 5 cultures working to set up a new factory, for instance. And, you know, communication is vastly different. Time length, the way time is perceived, the value of time is very different. And then how decisions are being made. And in this particular case, this was a huge challenge to a country which is in Europe, but had 4 cultures working to set up this new factory. And nothing was happening for the last 6 months. So imagine the amount of costs, which were in a way dead costs for the company. And after I had done the cultural integration workshop with them, they actually then invited me to do team building with them so that these teams can work more effectively together, because the awareness was there on culture. Now they can handle the other side of it.
Interesting. I have a background. I used to work for a Nordic management team, and the rest of the world thinks Scandinavia or Nordic as the same countries. You're all the same. I think that if I would have been a part of an American or Asian management team, I would have expected more difference in the culture. But since I was working together with people from my brother country, next door country, I didn't expect that there were so big differences, because I worked there for 9 years, and the longer I worked, the more I saw the differences.
You're so right, Dina, because when you start working with other cultures, not only do you learn about them or the differences, as you've rightly said, but you learn about your own culture.
Yes.
And I always say, before we understand another culture, we must understand who we are. What is our culture? Not that, I'm a Swedish nationality, so I need to know the Swedish. But what are my values? And I also say that people from the same culture may not even have the same value system or behave in the same way, because as individuals, we are different. And we have to look out for those individual differences. So yes, there is a norm of every culture. So I could say there's a norm of the Swedish culture, norm of the Danish culture, or whichever culture. But then there are individual differences. And you have to remember that individual differences matter. Because an individual difference, even two brothers and sisters from the same family are not the same. Because the exposure we've all had as individuals, it has been very different through our upbringing, the way we were brought up, then what exposure we had as a student, which universities we went, which countries we visited, what kind of experience we worked with, who did we work with. That brings us to what we are. And I always believe anyone, even a child who travels with their parents at the age of 4, 5, 6, and he's gone from London into perhaps Switzerland. When he comes back after 2 weeks holiday, he may be perhaps slightly different. He's a child still. But look at it if you're a grown up and you go and live there for 6 months, because secondments take place. I mean, when I also do training on relocation for companies who are sending their management in or out of UK, Europe, or wherever. And they have to understand how to live and work there. And even their kids have to function on that basis, because schooling may be very different. You know, in some countries, schooling has no uniform. And there are countries where uniform is part and parcel of everyday life for a child.
Yeah, I'm so fascinated by this. I have worked for Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, British, and American managers. There is a difference.
Yes, of course. And how they lead you, how they manage you, how do they motivate you? I mean, motivation is different in different cultures. Having worked in Europe first and with the American companies as well, I would like to say the motivators in this part of the world are very different when you're running, your human resources department and your company. Motivators in Asia, when I worked for 13 countries there, were very different culturally again. So what motivates me here may be actually a demotivator there. What motivates me over there may be a demotivator here. So how do you actually motivate people? How do you keep them engaged? That's another piece you have to remember. People come every day to work and they go home every night. You want to make sure they come back every day to you so that they can function well. How do you then handle the turnover side? You've just built a relationship with some colleagues in Far East who are very relationship based, and suddenly you've lost them all. Then you need to make sure that these people are engaged with you. Even though they're virtual working with diverse cultures, they are actually your staff too. Now, another challenge occurs for a remote manager. A manager is sitting in the UK, for instance, but he has 6 teams in 6 different countries. He has to make sure that all these 6 teams or 6 people of his team are bringing in the result for what they want as a company. Yet the communication style is different. The way you give feedback is very different. What could be okay on this side of the world may not be the other side of the world, because you have to remember what values are there in that part of the world. And then, when you speak also, English could be your language, which is a business language, but English is understood differently. In some cultures, English is the 4th language. In other cultures, it's the 1st language. How do you actually speak? How do you use the language as such? What do you actually avoid? Then humor comes in. In the British, we are fantastic at humor. We use humor every second sentence as such. And humor has a different meaning here. Do the rest of the world understand our British humor? Or do I actually understand the American humor? Do I understand the Indian humor? I don't know. And that could also fall flat on its face, because through humor, you could be losing somebody's face.
Yeah.
So there are several pieces to it. I mean, I love what I do. Each time I work, I learn something new myself. Not only do I give the learning, but I learn also from my participants who are sharing the training program with me. And it is absolutely fascinating. And every day is a new challenge for me. And that's what keeps me absolutely engaged in what I do.
I can understand that. I feel the same for what I do. So do you see any difference between men and women when it comes to cultural understanding?
Very interesting question you've asked. So if I could just clarify the question, are you asking me that are genders different because of culture?
No, I'm asking you if gender is a factor when it comes to understanding other cultures.
Okay, I understand. Okay, I would say to some extent, yes. With the globalization and the new generation, I think I would say it's changing a little bit. I'm only sharing this through my experience so far. I think today's younger generation, where the mobility is very high, whether it's a man or a woman who's traveling, whichever culture they come from, they have a different take on things. However, culturally, yes, gender is perceived differently, where in some culture, a woman could be a managing director of a company. But if you then socialize with her at home and she invites you for dinner, where her husband is also there, you will see a totally different person because she takes a subservient role of being the wife or the mother or the daughter-in-law or the sister compared to what she is at work. Whilst in other cultures, yes, you come home, you are still the managing director, but you don't have to be so vastly different. Even from a clothing point of view, I've noticed, where out in the workplace, you may be very modern in your clothing, but at home, when you come, you go into your traditional dress. There's nothing wrong. I think it's super if you can do that. But the onlooker who may not have any difference between home and work finds that fascinating. They find it at times challenging. Sometimes they don't understand. To understand those nuances, I think you need to go much deeper into that culture as to why it is happening. And when you understand the why of the culture, the what becomes easier.
I see. Has the new digital world had any impact on culture? I mean, you were talking about the remote leadership, but also the use of new tools.
I would say many countries are quite modernized in their internet and all the digital side, but there are some countries who are not because of the infrastructure. It's not because they don't want to be.
No.
In fact, many of those countries have people who are excellent with their skills and knowledge in this field, and they are being transported all over the world to improve it for our Western world as such. The question you're asking me is digitized world making it easier on culture or not? I would say, yes, we are working 24/7. This is through that digitized world we are able to do it. However, at times, communication still fails because it's how we write the email, which could be taken on with the information as it is. It could not be, perhaps, and that may not bring you the end result when you need it. Availability, of course, people are now available 24/7. But as a remote manager, are you available for 24/7? Because your team is in 3 or 4 time zones. And that's the part I find when I'm working with management. They are still working with their own cultural norms of switching off the mobile or closing off everything after 8 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the evening. Yet their colleagues, their staff are working through the night because the time zone is different. And they may have a major issue occurring where they need their management to make some decisions. And those are the cultures where management make the decision. So they're looking for their managers to make the decision. And this then delays on the time side. But yes, I think digitization is allowing people to be working 24/7, leading people by 24/7. But you need to have those skills and that open mindset. Because in some cultures, there is no line between social, personal, and work life. Everything is intertwined. So you could be rung at middle of the night for something and it's fine because that's how it works there. But in other cultures, oh no, after a certain time, the phone is switched off unless it's a matter of life or death. So flexibility. How flexible are you? How open are you to these things becomes the name of the game.
But you've been around for some time, as I have.
Yes.
What are the biggest changes that you see?
To changes in
Which country or which part of the world or which sector is actually have changed the most?
Oh, this is a $64 million question.
Yeah.
And I would like to say, I feel, again, through the experience, I don't think I can call one particular sector or one type of industry even, or country even. I feel as a globalized world and a global village, everybody is now starting to work on that basis. Some countries think they know it all. Perhaps it's okay, we can manage it. Other countries take on board in a very serious way this intercultural training, understanding and awareness. And I feel no industry group is free from doing this kind of work because their own staff are multicultural, cultural people. They are working with their counterparts who are a subsidiary in a different country, or they are a subsidiary in one country and their parent company is from another country. So they have to also understand. It's when things don't work out, which I explained earlier, bottom line doesn't come in, or challenges occur because timelines are being missed out, because time is viewed differently in different cultures. That's when the pain starts occurring. So the investment takes place at that point in helping.
So you don't see any role models in this?
I think if I was pushed for an answer of role models, I think the shipping industry, even though they have not probably consciously worked on intercultural field as a training program, many of them, when I'm working with some of the, like recently I've been working with superintendents because I go for workshops with them and then they go for certification. I do realize the amount of knowledge they have of the different cultures because they have worked throughout the world. But what I notice is many of them are very aware of it. But what is so nice to see is that some of them didn't know the whys of it. So they actually tell me in my feedback, now I've understood why the penny has dropped, why they were behaving in this manner, or why they were so hierarchical or they were lacking decisions. And when that penny drops and the why has been answered, so it becomes to the conscious level. So they've been working, they've managed it, sometimes through luck, sometimes through real understanding, because they were very open-minded people, because we are all different, right? Then it has worked quite well. But what I hear from these people when I work, because I work with lots of shipping companies like this, they say, oh, now I've understood the why part, which makes it much more interesting. And I will not be so narrow-minded in my head that only my way is the best way. There are other ways of doing things. It may not be my way, but in that culture, that's how it works. So if I'm going to work with this group, I need to adapt. And that's the part which becomes very, very interesting. As I said, the coin has two sides. You need to adapt to each other. Nobody's changing you to become another person. You are becoming more aware and you're able to now adapt to a new way of working because then you are even more effective in your work.
And you feel more fulfilled yourself.
Absolutely. You feel enriched. You feel empowered. You are even more engaged in the whole work situation. And that's very, very rewarding and fulfilling to you as a person, especially if you're a leader and you're leading the teams and the teams are blossoming. They are bringing in results big time. I think it's a very rewarding experience.
And I didn't force you to say the shipping industry.
No, I said it because I've done quite a bit of work. And when these thoughts came into my mind, when they said to me at the end of the workshop, you know what, Laxmi, you have given us the why, which we never understood why it was happening. We just said, oh, that's how they do it. And at times, people do, we all do. if we don't understand the whys, we think, they're wrong, I think, but what can I do? I don't think they should be doing it this way. It's when we understand the why, we sort of take a step back and say, okay, they're doing it. It's not wrong or right. Let's see why they're doing it. In this culture, the hierarchy is very important. Respect is very important. And therefore, they will not do anything besides doing it through that protocol, actually. So I feel it's the understanding, awareness, which creates very enriching results for each other.
At one time, I was also the area manager for a team in Sweden. And the team consisted of people who used to be at sea, master mariners and chief engineers and so on. We were a mixed group of men and women. And from time to time, I could pull their legs because I could just say, next week we're going to do this. And they said yes. And I asked, but do you think it's a good idea that we do it like that? No, but you are the boss. That is something also within the shipping industry that the captain is always the boss.
He's in charge.
He's in charge. So they didn't question me. I wanted them to question me. So that is why I pulled their leg.
So you did it through humor. They probably didn't understand the humor part.
Not first.
At first, yeah. So they expected you to give them instructions because they must not challenge you.
They didn't know I love a challenge.
Yeah. And this is what the things happen. I mean, these are some of the challenges which companies say. But we want them to contest it. We want them to think and give us ideas which are not what we are looking for, but maybe some new things, because they have so much intelligence. They have so many new ideas, but they tend to just say it the way we want to hear it. So then I address the issue by saying, well, there are other ways of questioning. That brings you the results where you will get some more ideas from them. And, this is through the training I share with them, the types of questions they must ask, and not just go with some of the basic questions like, I think I want to do it this way. What do you think? Well, the boss wants to do it this way. We'll do it this way. Because that's what he wants. They haven't listened to the other part, or what do you want to do? Or what are your thoughts? Well, I'm only a little person here. What importance are my thoughts in this decision making? Nothing. But in your head, because you come from a culture where equality is there, you want the subject matter expert to give you the answers. But I may come from a culture which only goes through the instructions and will follow what you have said. And if you have made the instruction wrong for any reason, or you expected someone to think outside of the box and say, well, he'll know what to do here. But hold on. He doesn't. He's never worked in your industry. We assume, and there's another part I was going to say, we assume a lot when we work across cultures. I think that's the biggest danger we can lead ourselves into. Don't assume. Be open-minded, be aware, ask the questions, the appropriate questions, of course, and get to know, and then work through that. And that's the trick. Because as I said before, we only have our own lenses. We don't have any other lenses because God has only given us one pair of eyes. First of all, we can even stop ourselves by not interpreting something or judging something very instantaneously. But we can also step back, think through and say, why is that culture doing it? Because of these reasons. Okay, so it's not wrong or right. It's just the way they do it. Okay, how do I handle it? I have to work our way. We have to bring it in. Another term I coined when I lived in Asia for 5 years and worked there. We say the global best practice. I would like to say, yes, global best practice, but it doesn't all fit. One size doesn't fit all. We have to localize. We have to understand the local meaning, local values. If your policy or your procedures or your rules have to be sustained there, you need to understand and incorporate the localness. Otherwise, it will be not sustainable. And for a while, lip service could be paid, but long-term sustainability will be a question mark. I'm not talking about that you avoid safety, because safety is safety, and you have to share. And sometimes when you go through the whys with people accept it much more easily. Because safety standards are very different across the world, as you know. What is safe in Britain may not be as safe perhaps in Germany. What may be safe in other parts of the world would be looked upon as absolutely hazardous, that you'll close the whole factory down. And yet those factories are operating every single day.
A completely different question. Shipping is often looked upon as the hidden industry. No one knows about us. What is your view on how could we become more visible to the public?
I think through more, not advertising as such, but creating through fairs, conferences, through the digital space as we know now, online stuff, information, going to the schools. How often are we going to the schools to tell people about shipping? Because I don't remember as growing up when anyone came to me and told me about the shipping industry, because we had the classic industries where people came and talked about, the law firms, the accounting, the marketing, or whatever else. It to spread the word through that. Of course, your own people working in the shipping industry are your biggest advocates. So I know also in the shipping industry, if the father has worked, probably his son has worked there. Maybe his daughter is now going to be working there. It is still very much a male-dominated environment, I'll be honest. So we need to bring a little more, and that will be through role models. And I think more and more women, because it was a breath of fresh air. When in one of the big strategic meetings I had attended, and I talked about culture, that out of 12 captains who were sitting there, one of them was a woman. Even it came as a shock to me. I shouldn't be shocked, but I was. And it was amazing. And I asked her what kind of challenges she had. Yes, at times, when you asked me about the gender question, I just remembered an example. She said at times, some cultures which are very male-dominated, or the senior people are always men as such, for the gender, they found it difficult to respect a woman, because in their culture, a woman has a secondary place. She's a homemaker. She's a mother. She's a daughter-in-law. So how can she run a ship? And so that was her response to me. She said, no, I work fine, and especially in cultures where equality is accepted. But in some cultures, the challenge for her was the acceptance. And yes, as a woman, we do have sometimes in a very much a male world, that challenge. But I think I've been a woman, of course, and I'm a woman. I have been a woman for many, many years, and I've grown into this business management role, and I became a director. But one of the first teachings I had was from my course director, who was a woman, when I finished my graduation, and she said goodbyes to us on that last day. And we were only 7 women in a group of 35 men who had done this degree. And she said, you're going out, and in those days the equality laws hadn't even come in. She said, you're going out as women in the man's world, but just remain a woman. Don't try to act like a man, and you'll succeed. And I've never forgotten that. I've remained a woman, whatever jobs I've done. And through my being just who I am, I've been able to gain my credibility and sustainability of running the show.
Wonderful. Good answer.
She really had given me that as a tip to all of us. And I've never tried to be a man. Because and yes, there is always this point where as a woman, sometimes in some industries, you have to be 4 times better than a man to be recognized. Yes, that's the challenge we all face. Some of us face much more in some cultures and countries than others.
Thank you for your time.
Very welcome.
It was so nice to meet you again. Who do you think I should interview the next time? Do you have any good ideas of who you would be interested to listen to in a podcast?
I would need to think about this.
Mm-hmm.
I think an industry leader would be interesting to hear, especially, I think I'm going to go, because we've ended up on a gender part, which is women-men situation. Yes, I think I'd like to hear from a CEO who's a woman, for how long she's been working and why she has been successful, because I think it's a nice role model to look at. And it's very good for our daughters or our daughter-in-laws who are working to have that kind of role model. And I think it goes to that point which I came from a family where my mother was working. My mother-in-law was a doctor. My mother was a teacher. And so that's the role model I've had. My daughter is following the role model from me. She's a lawyer, but she's a mother and she's still working. So I think sometimes we need to have role models for us to kind of say, well, it is hard, but unless we try, we can't get anywhere. So maybe, yes, I think I've given you the answer. I don't have to think at all. I think I'd like to hear about a woman CEO who has been in industry a long time and what made her successful. I have my own thoughts, but we don't have time to talk about that.
No. Thank you very much. I will see what I can do, and I will let you know who it will be.
Yeah, Please do.
Thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you for giving me the time.
I hope you enjoyed listening to Laxmi. I totally enjoyed seeing her again and talking to her. This was the last interview from my visit to London during the summer 2016. I met Laxmi on July the 13th, so she's been waiting for a long time to listen to this release. I've got more interesting interviews for you in pipeline. You can see on the website shippingpodcast.com who is next in line, and next in line, and next. And when you listen to this, I've just been to Copenhagen and got some more in my bag for you. I have been deep diving into statistics. I'm trying to find out if this shipping podcast is measuring up to other podcasts in other industries. I'm going to write more about that in my newsletter, which you can sign up for. Everything happens on shippingpodcast.com. Just look for the sign up. But I can share with you that this podcast is downloaded in 136 countries. The top 10 is still Sweden, of course, because I'm nagging at everyone I meet. But then in the second place is United States, United Kingdom, Norway, Germany, Spain, Denmark, the Netherlands, China, and Finland. I can see that there has been changes since the summer. It's downloaded in more countries, and there is a little bit of competition between the countries where the podcast is downloaded. The podcast was meant for everyone who doesn't know much about shipping, but I can see it's in the maritime hubs where it's downloaded the most. And the countries where I can see the most increase in downloading is Saudi Arabia and Nigeria. Thank you for listening. Thank you everyone for listening. I think it's great to have 3,500 people listening to the podcast every month. That is actually more than I could ever have dreamed of. But now when I see that it's possible and that you are interested and loyal and sending me feedback, I think there is a void that this podcast is filling. There are not a lot of radio programs covering the shipping industry or the maritime professionals, and definitely no podcast other than this one gives the space and the room to the people working in the industry, the people that makes the shipping industry go around. So don't forget to tell everyone that they should download the shipping podcast. It could make a difference. We could have a place in cyberspace, in the podcast space at least, that is ours. And we could try and get more people to listen to all the interesting guests that is given me their time. So, until the next time, from me to you, over and out. Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a shipping podcast where the maritime professionals are talking about their everyday job.